You cheer now before you even heard me say anything.
That's it.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to be here and to have been chosen for the Lyons Award for Conscience and Integrity in Journalism. And the introduction is like no other I've ever received, and thank you so much for wonderfully kind words and love. Those two virtues, conscience and integrity, should never be subtracted from the ethical practice of journalism in order for our now embattled industry and each of us to maintain an unimpeachable credibility. But all of that is constantly being challenged now and corrupted. I think back 40 years ago to one of the first stories I covered for the Kansas City Star-Times as a young general assignment reporter and photographer. Yes, I was a photographer. To put that in perspective to my being here today, it would be as if some old guy during the first year of my career was retelling an incident that happened to him during his first year in journalism in 1937. Anyway, my editors sent me to a dinner meeting in 1977 and wanted a story on what the speaker said. I got to the Hilton Plaza Inn early to talk with the organizer. We spoke, and then he offered me a seat at one of the many tables so that I could enjoy a free dinner. All of the canons of ethics in journalism were still swirling in my 21-year-old head from the University of Missouri Columbia School of Journalism, the world's oldest, established in 1908, and, wait for it, still the best school of journalism on the planet. So I declined. The host of the dinner was shocked that I said no to the free meal and insisted that I dine with his hundreds of paying dinner guests. I again declined and said that I would take a seat by the door and wait to take notes on what the speaker had to say so I could return to the newsroom to write my story for the morning newspaper. The host was beside himself. He said, "We've never had a reporter from the Star refuse a meal." I thanked him for the offer, took a seat by the door, and got enough notes from the speaker to put together a story, which we did in 1977 on electric typewriters rolling in 4 carbons. Kids in school today always ask, "What's a carbon?" When I returned to the newsroom, the night city editor didn't want to know what the speaker said, what the story would cover, or to tell me how long he wanted my copy to be. Instead, his very direct question was, "What did they feed you?" When I told him and the assistant night city editor that I declined the dinner offer, they were stunned and worried that I had messed up a system of free meals that the hungry, underpaid staff depended on from dinners being assigned as reporters. I wrote the story, and it ran the next morning, and I still refuse free meals, gifts, and other potentially compromising things. Strict ethics rules, and being above even the appearance of a conflict of interest caught up in my head, and they eventually caught up with the Kansas City Star-Times, proving me correct in my early commitment to doing the right thing in this profession. In my career, I have stood up to numerous ethical challenges for myself and many voiceless others without blinking about the consequences. I owe that uncompromising integrity to my mother, my father, and the Black community in which we were raised. I note in my soon-to-be-published book, Our Fathers Making Black Men, that my parents, in tandem with other African Americans, instilled in every kid that they encountered that we had to be twice as good, cleaner than clean, and work 5 times harder to make it in white America. Anything less was unacceptable. I quote author and motivational speaker George Fraser in my 2004 book, A Teacher's Cry, Expose the Truth About Education Today, in which he said, if you are black and mediocre in America, leave, because you will continue to be marginalized and ultimately you will be destroyed. That has not changed at all. I have tried to instill that sense of on-the-job excellence as a faculty member since 1982 for a journalism academy that the Kansas City Association of Black Journalists annually provides, as a faculty member from 1991 to 2007 for the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education's Editing Program Fellowship, and with every young person I encounter on the job, at church, in the community, in journalism schools nationwide, and at journalism conventions. It's needed now more than ever. Here's why. It's about more than newspapers, magazines, radio, television, and new media journalism. The well-being of the United States, our democracy, and good government in all countries depends on uncompromising quality being maintained in journalism. That's because people in this country and elsewhere depend on accurate, honest, ethical, and timely reporting and writing so that they can make the best possible decisions in our free society. That's at the core of the philosophy existentialism. I note in my 2007 book, Discovering the Real America Toward a More Perfect Union, that when we fail to do our jobs properly as journalists, we make existential victims out of a population of people who depend on a free press for good information. So when we don't do our jobs right, when we are unethical, when we lack integrity, when we are not honest, when we let racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, or elitism into our copy, when we succumb to pressure to get a story first instead of getting it right, we hurt our country and all of the people in it. I also note in Discovering the Real America a story that singer, actor, and civil rights activist Harry Belafonte shared at a National Association of Black Journalists convention after a big civil rights victory. Everyone was jubilant, except the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Belafonte said he asked Dr. King why he also wasn't happy. King replied, "I fear that we are integrating ourselves into a burning building." His concern back in the 1960s was that white America was on fire with racial hatred, with war, with social and economic inequality, with sexism, with elitism, with classism, and with homophobia, just to name a few. And Dr. King was right then, just as he would be today under Donald Trump's occupation of the White House with the help of Russian hackers. Belafonte explained that Black America had to become the world's best firefighters to douse the roaring flames of social and economic wrongs at home and abroad. But it's also from the best of Black America, which gave the nation the gifted leadership of President Barack Obama, that our ailing journalism profession also can be salvaged. The diversity of this nation is its greatest strength. More people just need to discover that undeniable truth. I quote Amy Tan in Discovering the Real America saying, "They didn't know who I really was. They didn't know how much the smallest amount of recognition would have meant to me, and how the smallest amount of criticism could undo me." Like the black community of my youth, brought to life in our fathers making black men, each of us has a responsibility to build up others around us, to harness the best of that our diversity has to offer. It is in our own self-interest to do nothing less. I tell journalism students that our profession is built on the sands of doubt. We doubt our sources, we doubt our notes, we doubt what we write, and then our editors doubt us and everything that we do. The doubt is all about making our journalism better by compelling us to get more sources, ask better questions, and write more fact-based, compelling stories. But the sands of doubt grind deeply into the skin of our souls and our self-confidence, and that takes a heavy toll on each of us. Keep in mind that it's worse for journalists of color in this white male-dominated industry because there are still a lot of people who think we don't have the intellectual horsepower, the necessary skills with the language, and we often lack our colleagues' trust on whether we will be black first or a journalist on the job in our writing and editing of stories. I had one city editor in discussions about a planned series of stories on African Americans moving to the suburbs that my staff of reporters was assigned to cover, tell me that I could not edit that important series because I'm black. To which I quickly retorted, so does that mean you can't edit any stories about white people because you're white? He got my point and apologized for making such a racially stupid statement. My dear friend and a co-presenter, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, with the Wellesley College Centers on Women, who did the groundbreaking work on white privilege, which also is included in Discovering the Real America, explained to me that the bigoted mindset that women and people of color constantly encounter is because knowledge in this country is always thought to be male and white. Everyone else is forever tested and doubted. I've had editors in my career tell me, we hired you to be a journalist. Leave that black stuff outside. When I insisted on better reporting about communities of color, because I was relentless, just as I was taught by the black community, I prevailed and the newspaper changed. However, tough economic times keep erasing the advances. We have to fight the undoing of us, of others, and of our needed progress by supporting those journalists and people in the community around us. It is how our journalism constantly gets better. These are increasingly challenging times. Without evidence, which is his hallmark, Donald Trump, throughout his run for the White House, attacked the ethics, integrity, honesty, and competence of the news media, and the gullible public has swallowed it all as if it were true. We also see it continuing. The next 4 years will be all about ethics, integrity, conscience, and honesty among government officials and those in the news media. Our industry, just as things were when I started my career, will be pulled to cut costs and cut corners, bend and break rules, make unholy alliances and compromises, and sell out our integrity and ethics in the interest of expediency, corporate shareholders, and cash. The reporting, editing, and photo shooting troops on the ground have to be bigger than that. They will have to be like the people in the black community that raised me. We have to push back. Ethics is the well-constructed canal through which good journalism must flow. The heavy downpour of social media and the toxic sewage of fake news must never replace the essential information of good quality journalism. We have to say no to running with the torrent and instead stand on the pillars of the best of our profession, even against the crushing interest of big money. You Nieman Fellows also have an even greater responsibility now because of your having been chosen and because of your studies in this program. You must be disciples of the gospel of journalism excellence. You have to embrace your new responsibility and go back to your newsrooms and share with others the non-negotiable values of our profession. I am reminded of what the Black community instilled in me, which I must share with you. It comes from the Bible, instructing that to those whom much is given, much then is expected. It's greater than Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement instruction of each one teach one. You absolutely cannot return, especially in these challenging times, thinking you have no responsibility to do more than you have ever done for our profession and for others. I want to close with something I picked up from a journalism textbook that I used when I was a student in 1984 in the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education Editing Fellowship at the University of Arizona in Tucson. I've kept this quote on the back of an American Society of Newspaper Editors business card that a now long dead friend of my folks, Carl Morris, gave me. My dad used to say that for everyone else it's a small world, but for Black business professionals it's a small universe, and we must always be there to support and cheer one another. I've kept this card and the quote in my wallet because they truly are inspiring words that I've always believed in and tried to live by and share. I hope you will find this quote as significant as I do. The words are from Stephen Grillier, an 18th and 19th century French-born American Quaker missionary, who said, "I shall pass through this world but once. If therefore there be any kindness I can show or any good thing I can do, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I understand there's a question and answer period. Questions? This is not Saturday Night Live. This is not the White House. Please, anyone. Yes.
Tyler Dukes, WRAL News in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Nieman Fellow this year. How do we be better mentors as current journalists to the next generation of journalists coming in? And where do we look to find people, and how do we help them do their jobs better?
Okay, that's a good question. I always ask, and ever since I first started in journalism and even before, what would I want someone to have done for me when I just walked in the door, brand new? How could I have done better if someone were welcoming of my presence there and showed me the ropes? One of the things, being Black in any profession, and I've talked with people all across the spectrum, we face, when we enter a job, when we're promoted in a job, zero support. So that we're just tossed in and say, hey, do your best. And without that support, the chances of failure are extremely high. Without people cheering you on and showing you, try this, do that, the chances are very high that we won't make it. In diversity workshops, that I've led since 1993 when I became a facilitator. We have what we call the technical and the social side of proficiency, and how people are measured in terms of what makes them good at their job. When you fill it out, you'll find that the social side is almost 5 times longer than the technical side. Making the social connections with your coworkers is so very critical to your success. And we always discount that when it comes to women and when it comes to people of color. So that the social side is off the table because people don't think that we have anything in common with anyone else. But they look at our technical ability and judge us purely on that. Whereas with our white and particularly male colleagues, the social side stands out, and then they get other people to coach and help them to develop their technical side. And it's important to realize that as you look at someone who is not like you, as they come into your newsroom, as they come into your station and say, I'm going to help this person because I wish that I had that happen for me, or I know that because this person is a woman or a minority, it won't happen unless I do it. So you must step up to ensure the success of everyone. And when you do, you'll find that those individuals are likely to stay longer than if you did nothing. We talk about white privilege, and definitely it is an issue and a concern, and all of Peggy McIntosh's 62 points of white privilege are in my book, Discovering the Real America, and it's striking. But we as people who have done well in this profession also have a privilege that we must share so that our success continues in the success of new generations coming in and the success of people who aren't normally seen as people who hold those jobs. I always tell people that when I started at the Star Times in 1977, there were so few black journalists who worked for the 2 newspapers then that you could count us on 2 hands and still have enough fingers to smoke a cigarette and drink a beer. It's worse now. It's worse now. Next question. Yes, sir.
I'm Justin Eckman from Reuters. I wanted to ask, how do we make everyone feel responsible for diversity rather than just the people who are kind of on the sharp end of it? How do we make it everyone's role to step up?
First, you have to model it. You model it coming from Nieman, people pay attention. You have a credibility that most folks only dream to have in this profession. You model it, other people will start to model it, and it becomes a reality. Also, you bring into your newsroom details about how diversity enhances a workplace so that people see the importance of it. And then you have other folks come in to speak about the issue of diversity so that it's not just you, but it's other people singing the same song. Very important. Over here.
Sabina Shrestha from the Power from the Parent Journalist. As a person who's been trolled before trolling started, as you can say, how do you end up having the moral courage to fight on? Where do you get it from?
I apologize, first of all, for breaking up as I spoke about my parents. They were merciless. It is the only word I can use. They were warriors, and they insisted on nothing less than myself and my older brother David also being warriors in the fight for racial equity and justice. And then growing up in St. Louis, that is a hard, nasty city. And if you can come out of St. Louis and survive, you are one hard, nasty mofo. And so yeah. And so my point is that, and I always tell people, you don't know where I'm from, You don't know how I have been forged in the fires that make steel. And if you have all of that, because I've had death threats, people have, come up to me, and generally when people blow at me, I mean, if they call, I call them back. If they write, I write them back. If they email, I email them back. And sometimes I sit down and have dinner or a cup of coffee or breakfast with them, because a lot of times people make these offensive statements not knowing who the other person is. They have in their head the stereotypes about us because that's what they've been taught. That's what they've been taught in our books, in our classrooms, and especially in the media. And so when I sit down with them, they're like, "You're nothing like I pictured." And it relaxes the whole thing. But my point in doing that is, being where I'm from, I've already been through the fire. And so I have no fear. And the worst, I learned growing up in St. Louis, you don't ever get into a fight with someone who has nothing to lose and something to prove. I have nothing to lose. And I have something to prove, and that is that I can disprove every stereotype that people have of persons of color and of women. And given the chance, I will. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Christian Feld. I'm a TV journalist from Germany. Experience that I had in my company is that when the leadership tried to bring in people from minorities, let's say like with Turkish roots, to the newsroom, they often got the label, they are the quota guys. What do you do to avoid that?
I was a quota guy. I was hired at a time when hiring wasn't taking place, but in February, I went knocking on the door of the Kansas City Star, and they wouldn't let me in because they had their quota of blacks on staff. But then in March, a fellow, 26 years old, been with the newspaper for 6 years, he was African American. They sent him out on an assignment, and they found him the next day wandering the streets of Kansas City, Kansas. He didn't know who he was, where he was, what he was, or how he got there. He had had a nervous breakdown. This industry is crushing. And so all of a sudden, they needed someone black to replace someone black. And our folks insisted that with a name like Diuguid, nobody will know that you're black. So they said, put it at the top of your resume. So there was my address, phone number with my name, race, black. And they were like, hey, we found one. So I don't think anyone who is hired should see it as a badge of dishonor if they fulfill a quota, but they have to go beyond that and to excellence so that then more people like them are hired because, by golly, that's the best person for the job. In going through the diversity training, in becoming a diversity facilitator through the Newspaper Association of America, one of the trainers insisted that talent is colorblind, to which I said, bullshit. Talent is not colorblind. And they jumped on me with 2 feet. I said, listen, I can send 2 reporters out to the same assignment. One might be a woman, the other might be a male. Or someone is an African American and the other is a white male. They'll come away hearing 2 different things, 2 different aspects of the story. And we need to recognize that when we send people out on assignments. We need to know who's going to bring back the best. So if the Turkish journalists come in and they can do the job, by golly, take them. Because they can get at communities that you can't, that other people can't. And that talent is never colorblind. Yes?
Katherine Goldstein. So I think there's a really interesting discussion right now going on about objectivity, especially covering the intensity of our current political moment. What is your take on how people should think about and cover the Trump administration when part of their very existence and right to be at the table is sort of challenged by the administration.
Good question, and I was hoping someone would ask that. The Trump administration knows the rule book of good journalism, and so the rule book needs to be tossed. The press corps should be filled with people who play hardball journalism in a way that Trump never envisioned. People who will call bullshit on the stuff that he's saying and doing, who will say that's a lie, and when are you going to start telling us the truth? The people need to know. And it's not just the United States, but the world is watching this comedy, and no one's really laughing. We need to change the way we do journalism, holding fast to all of the canons and best practices, but change so that we are more accountable to the people we're supposed to serve. I've been in a situation with elected officials who have been after my job on many, many, many different occasions. And again, going back to St. Louis, fighting on the street, you have to be just as hardcore as the people who are after you, and fearless. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Felicia Fonseca from the AP in Northern Arizona. We talked a little bit about your departure from the Star in the selection committee meetings. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to leave, and if you at all regret it in a way that you maybe let down the Black community?
No regrets. Let's put that on the table. I have no regrets. As a matter of fact, I've been able to do more in the community than I have in the last 3 years, because staff cuts had occurred at such a degree that those of us who were left were working enormous hours just to try to get the paper out. And my heart goes out to the people who are still there, because they are individuals who are pushing for quality journalism at a very high cost to their own personal life and what they normally would do. I had to sacrifice my community engagement and community involvement because of the demands of the job. Well, I don't know about you, but a journalist who's not engaged and involved in the community, I think, is the most ignorant sumbitch on the planet. And that's because we're in the dumbest place on the planet, and that's the newsroom. We are only as good as we can be if we're engaged with the public, knowing what the public is up to, what the public is wanting, what the public needs are, and then reporting on it. When we're not engaged, we're doomed. On my being at the Star, we started last year with 4 persons on the editorial board, which is unconscionable. We were overworked, understaffed, and just beating up everything that we could to try to keep the place going. And then a really, really ignorant management decision was made to allow 2 persons to take an early buyout, 2 persons on the editorial board, so we were down to 2. The other individual and I, we worked just enormous, even beyond enormous hours, just to keep things going and to make it appear as if everything was good. It wasn't right that you had an editorial board of 2 persons, because where's the board? Where are the voices of so many people who are supposed to add into the institutional voice of the newspaper? It didn't exist. It was Yale, Abu Hoka, and myself, and we'd meet briefly, discuss what we were going to do, and then attack it. And we really didn't have time to do anything else. Then in the ongoing layoffs, Yale was laid off, and I went to the publisher as he called me in and to tell me that I was going to be the sole editorial board member from the end of September into the beginning of the middle of December when the new editorial board editor was to come on, and told me that I would have to be it. There wasn't a choice, and I said, that's insanity, and I don't do insanity. The person I replaced, and I gave him the same story that I gave you guys, of the guy who had a nervous breakdown. I said, I'm not doing that. I said, my entire career, so I've been to that wall. I don't want to touch it, and that's where things were going. So I resigned, and I have no regrets because I've been so engaged in the community, giving speeches and talks that are totally apart from journalism, but more about what the citizens of this country should be doing. And it's just been refreshing, which is what I've been doing before. And then, on the side, I pull out my notebook and write down stuff as story ideas and then take them back to the newspaper. So I miss that part of it, but always good ideas find a home. Yes?
Yeah, Heidi Vogt with the Wall Street Journal. I'm wondering, having spent so much of your career in Kansas City, do you feel like you have a different perspective than journalists in places like New York and DC? And if so, what do you think, what is behind that? What is the difference?
Well, in the time that I've been with the Star, I've had many job offers, St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, Seattle, and always what I thought when these job offers would come, and it was with a lot more money, is that they were offering me a job, but I had work to do in Kansas City. I knew the people, I knew the issues, I knew what was going on, and I knew that from Kansas City I could also do things that would be meaningful, not just for young journalists coming in, but people who wanted to be journalists, and for the community that was demanding that we do better. My dread is that so many young people coming into journalism see it as a career, see it as an opportunity to just feather their cap and then move on. It's not. The black community has always wanted a voice in journalism, whether it's the TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, that carry their message, that speak the truth that they know, and it's very different from white America. It's very different. And they want people to know that they are husbands and wives and mothers and fathers and tax-paying, hardworking citizens. And so often when you boil down the journalism that we give them, it shows people of color as being a lot less. And we must do a better job, because when we do our job, when things are right with us, then it creates opportunities in the community for people who otherwise would be defined by a zip code, who otherwise would be defined as ne'er-do-wells, as underperformers, as criminals. We have to tell the real story, and unfortunately that's not occurring. Whether it's in New York or Philadelphia or Seattle, we have to do it where we are and not think that we can go from place to place to place to place and it's going to magically happen. It won't. Yes, ma'am.
Molly in Chicago Tribune. Louis, you talked about community engagement and telling the stories of real communities and diverse communities. Can you talk about how you can connect with communities that feel betrayed by the media, by their local news organizations that have taken stances that are possibly in contrary to their interests?
Yes, you touched a nerve. When I first started, a fellow pulled me aside and he said, "We don't trust you. You've come from that white newspaper and we know what they're going to, you can come in here, ask these questions, we can give you our responses, you'll get back and they'll change your story to what they want." And he was right, that was the way that things were set to go. They wanted someone who was malleable, who was going to be easy, and who would take things as they wanted it to go. I broke the mold. I let them know from the start, that's not the way it went. And if you're going to do it, take my byline off of it, and I'm going to raise hell. And you have to be prepared to just get in people's face and let them know that you're not going to bend in the way that they want you to bend. I had been sent out ages ago to cover Andy Young when he was the UN ambassador for the United States. And when I went back to the newsroom, they had already gotten the wires from the AP, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and they said, this is how your story's going to go. I said, no, it's not. No, it's not. This is what he said. This is what I'm going to write, and this is what you're going to print. And, you know, they never had anybody do that. And so we have to have the fire in us to be insistent that this is how things will go. And then the community needs to know that we made this step beyond what they've ever seen happen in the past, and that things are going to be different. Other questions? Please.
I'm Beth Altrier. I teach in the engineering and the design schools here. And I'm not a journalist, but we do have a comparable questioning design of integrity and ethics of design, particularly as it pertains to algorithmic design of content platforms and what gets served up. And from hearing you speak, I think that there are a lot of people who are capable of being warriors in the way that you have said that, but maybe don't have the background to prepare them for that strength in some ways. So I'm interested in how you mentor and or support people to quickly develop the capacity to be fearless and to stand up when maybe they don't have that in their own personal background.
Good question. Janae can speak to the fact that when we bring the students in who have a definite interest in journalism careers, many of them want to be broadcasters, and we don't dissuade them from that. But we hold them to standards that they've never been held to all of their lives. I mean, they're high school and college kids, and they have this rose-colored image of what a journalist is. And we have to break it down to them on what they need to be. And we get them to write news stories and do at least 3 rewrites on their stories. We get them to produce their own newspaper, their own TV broadcast, their own radio broadcast, so that they understand the pressures of deadlines and know what journalists are about. And we yell at them, we cuss them, we make fun of them when they are wrong, but we also coddle them and help them and nurture them when they're right. So that it is a very engaging process for the adults as well as the young people, and always in the end, the parents come up to us and they say, what did you do to our kid? We don't have to be on them to make their bed, to do their homework, to be self-starters. They just do it automatically. And you know, our problem is a lot of young people have not been pushed. Like I was pushed, like my brother was pushed, like so many people who are successful and in this room have been pushed. And we need to provide that sense of confidence within them so that they know that their ability is without question. And we need to provide them with that sense of courage to be able to stand up when they're faced with people who have a title and have been doing this a long time, but that doesn't excuse them from being stupid. Yes?
I was lucky enough to sit in on your diversity meetings, and I know all of you come from different newspapers and news organizations where you talk about diversity, and I know before I ever went to one of Lewis's meetings, the way they talked about diversity was like, did you talk to a black person? Did you talk to a woman? It's kind of tokenism, but when you would go to one of the diversity workshops, Lewis was very adamant about making you understand that the revolution will be intersectional and talking about women and immigrants and the LGBTQ community. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of a unified civil rights movement and understanding all the communities involved in diversity tenets?
Sure. The beauty of diversity in this country is none of us thinks alike. We all come at things from our own unique perspective, and when we look at a situation, we come away with a different viewpoint, a different assessment. And women's assessment will be radically different from a dumb guy like me, or a person who may be a white male. And so the more we go to people who are different and not like us, the more we increase the journalism that we will convey to the public. Now, the collective voices and making sure that all of it figures into this era of Trump is so important, because they then, in that unity, can show a strength that singularly none of us could. None of us within our group could. And it's that unity that I think is important. Donald Trump will test the Constitution. You heard this first here. Unlike Nixon did, unlike anyone else did, he will test the Constitution. He will test our democracy. He will test the people who make up our democracy. And we as journalists need to be prepared for the moment of that test. It may not be some mushroom cloud, but it will be a big, big test. And if you know it's coming, and everything that he's done shows that it is, then you can prepare for it. The world needs to prepare for it. But in unity, people will have strength to ensure that the Constitution, our democracy, our country, continues beyond this very foul moment. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. The first is many journalists are feeling that their identities are being attacked by Trump, and how, but if you do something, the people label you as activist, and it's like difficult for a journalist being considered an activist. So what is your advice, how to perform? And the other is what you're gonna do now in the visiting fellow. Which are your plans?
I've been accused of being an activist too, surprisingly. But I'd also been a columnist. So as a columnist, I can state opinions about things, and I can be in places that activists go and learn what activists are doing and take an activist voice in the opinion that I express. So I think it's important that journalists, again, draw a line to say, okay, I cannot cross here. So if you are a reporter or photographer working on the news side, you can cover those things in ways that haven't been covered before without actually crossing over to the other side. And that's what I did in covering the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, from the standpoint of the peace protests that were taking place early on, when so many people were behind the effort to go to war. My own view of what to do now. Well, I have this new book coming out, and it's really an answer to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I borrow from the National Association for Multicultural Education, of which Betty Tate Beaver is the executive director, my partner. And it's Sankofa bird. And the Sankofa is a mythical bird that is meant to go back and fetch. So it's from the past we apply solutions to the present. And we have forgotten as a people how much we need to be engaged in the lives of young people and how much we've turned them over to gadgets and the media, so that the media are raising our children rather than adults doing the hard work. And you have to really appreciate what the media have at their core. I mean, yes, it's about providing information and services, but it's also about selling products, particularly the electronic media. Television is nothing more than a marketing device. And so if we turn the TV off, take away the cell phones, take away the tablets, take away the laptops and the desktops, and just get at one-on-one adults with kids, then you have an interaction that is not unlike what my older brother and I grew up with, what our siblings grew up with, but also a neighborhood of kids who got pulled into black businesses, then the kids seeking money, just a little change, but taught to do jobs, given work, and then filled with stories about success. And so that is what I plan to do even more. And then I've got some other things on the side that I really, really, really need to do that haven't gotten done because I've just been shackled by a job that needs to change. Other questions? You guys ask good questions. Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity and for the award. This is quite an honor. And I look forward to more engagement with all of you. Betty Tate Beaver and I, to the Unitarian Universalist Church, did a PowerPoint this past Sunday of editorial cartoons that I'd collected ahead of the November election. And what they show is absolutely striking. I'd done the same thing in 2008 for community groups in the depictions of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as images that were racist and sexist. And the ones that have occurred leading up to the presidential election in November are just as astounding, but focused solely on Hillary Clinton. If you wonder why she lost, you'll wonder no more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louis. That was really inspiring, even as it was sobering. And I just want to thank you especially for mentioning the Maynard Institute, which is, of course, named for Bob Maynard, who, the great publisher in Oakland, California, the late publisher. His photograph hangs in the curator's conference room here at Nieman. He was a much beloved Nieman Fellow, and his daughter Dory also became a Nieman Fellow, as well as a friend of mine. And I never met her father, but I felt like I knew him through Dory, and I miss her very much. They were a rare father-daughter Nieman legacy. I think we only have 3 of those maybe in the history of the Nieman Foundation. But it was really, it just, that and your exhortation to the Nieman Fellows, that to be given much is also to owe much, and so to think about him and that generation, and to connect it to the work ahead of this generation of Nieman Fellows was very moving to me personally. So again, thank you very much to the Nieman class for your obviously wise decision. And we will proudly add your name to this board of really extraordinary men and women. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we look forward to spending more time with you in the days ahead. Thank you again to the Nieman class and to our guests who are with us here tonight. Really glad that you were all here.